Thursday, 10:02 a.m. The county hearing room was full. Metal chairs, microphones, faces that smelled like coffee and storm mold. On the big screen, drone footage, 8 roofs, all blue tarps, 8 checks already cashed in the church's name. My father-in-law, Deacon Horace Mayfield, stood up in his new gray suit and shouted, "This is an ambush." The chair tapped her mic once and said, "This is a county, and these are roofs." That's when the room went silent, the kind of silence that only truth can buy. I'm Naomi Mayfield, daughter-in-law, volunteer, free labor with a loudmouth. That's what he called me. But I used to work in the county records office. And numbers talk if you listen. It started with one rubber band around one ledger behind the church kitchen, storm relief funds, duplicate vendors, and a line that didn't add up. I didn't plan to start a war. I just opened a book. And when I did, I found every secret they thought God had hidden for them. By the end of this story, a kitchen will rise where the fraud began, and the same woman they tried to silence will feed the whole town. Because counting is counting, soup or ledger. I carried boxes until my shoulders hummed and my hands forgot they were hands. Our church pantry sat behind the fellowship hall, a concrete rectangle with a tin roof that sounded like coins when the rain hit it. People lined up early because word traveled faster than weather on this coast. I signed for shipments, counted cans, taped lists to the fridge no one cleaned. I did it because it needed doing, and somewhere along the way, it became what people expected me to do. Quiet, steady, always there. That morning, the blue van idled near the dock door, coughing exhaust that mixed with the smell of gumbo from the kitchen. Father-in-law stepped close, breath like coffee and mint, a deacon pin glinting on his lapel. He tapped the edge of my clipboard as if tapping a glass to call a room to order. "Free labor with a loudmouth," he said in a voice made for scolding. "Naomi ought to stick to soup, not ledgers." Someone laughed, a short, brittle sound that skittered across the loading dock like a dropped fork. My sister-in-law, Kendra, stood 2 steps behind him, her hair smooth like a magazine cover, a tablet pressed against her chest like a hymn book. She smiled without warmth and adjusted her powder pink blazer. I smiled back like a porch light. On, steady, revealing nothing. "Counting is counting," I said, checking the last box off the list. "Soup or ledger. Counting is my job. Yours is ladles and smiles." He walked away before I could say I know how to do both. In the kitchen, Aunt Pearl stirred a pot big enough to drown a toddler. Steam made her face shine. She wore her shrimp shed apron over a faded Gulfport High t-shirt and had a laugh like a boat horn. Sudden, unapologetic, full of life. "You look like a tax bill. Eat before you pick a fight you can't win." I ate. With Aunt, you always eat first. She slid me a bowl and a piece of bread with butter soft as confession. I ate standing up, eyes sliding to the small office off the fellowship hall, where the church ledger lived. A marbled composition book with corners rubbed white, and a rubber band that had survived more summers than it should have. After the meal line thinned, I slipped into the office and shut the door. The ledger felt heavy, the way a secret feels heavy. I undid the rubber band. March, April, May. I ran my thumb down columns of numbers that looked reasonable at first glance and wrong on second. The wrong kind of neat. Same vendor listed 8 times across 2 weeks. Gulf Grace, roofing, duplicate amounts down to the penny. Same memo, storm relief, completed. I had worked at the county recording office for 12 years. 8 of those at a desk where maps and parcel numbers and liens passed through my hands like rain through gutters. Numbers talk, if you listen. They talk about where money hides and who believes they are invisible. I wrote one line on the back of an offering envelope and tucked it under the ledger's cover. Duplicate vendor, confirmed parcels. Outside, the choir practiced, voices melting into one another until the worst singer sounded like a cousin of the best. Father-in-law's shoes clicked in the hall. My husband, Caleb, laughed with one of the men from the building committee. A laugh I used to feel in my chest and now felt in my teeth. I closed the ledger gently, the way you set down a sleeping child. During service, Reverend Cole preached on mercy, then on money, then returned to mercy again, as if one was the engine and the other the brakes. Kendra clicked through slides that showed photos of bowed heads under blue tarps, and those same heads later under shining shingles. "Our partners replaced 42 roofs this spring alone," she said, voice honeyed. "Your giving makes miracles." The church clapped. I clapped too, because clapping is a kind of covering, and we were in need of coverings everywhere. After service, I watched father-in-law pass plates with both hands, deliberate, efficient. He slid a second plate under the first at the last pew, swallowed it into the curve of his arm like a magician's trick, then walked down the side aisle to the office. He didn't know I'd seen him do that before. He didn't know I kept a sticky note in my Bible at Psalm 12, "Help, Lord, for the godly are no more," where I'd written, "Plate under plate. Plate goes to office. Counting is counting, soup or ledger." The next morning, I signed into the county records room as volunteer inventory because people ask fewer questions when you show up with words that imply giving. The woman at the desk had brought a box fan from home that clacked like a loose tooth. The room smelled like paper and patience. I asked for drawer C12, parcel maps by street. I penciled 8 parcel ID numbers next to addresses I recognized from the ledger: Pine Street, Moss Point, Lark Lane. I looked them up on the terminal. Aerial photos showed tarps bleached by sun, corners flapping like a flag no one saluted. 8 parcels, 8 checks, 8 lies. Mildew darkened the corner ceiling in a shape like a hand. I stared until my eyes watered, then took out a cheap camera and snapped photos of the screen because the story I was building needed pictures and paper, 2 kinds of proof the powerful pretend to respect. That night, I moved into Aunt Pearl's extra room behind her dockside lunch window. "Room small, truth's big," Aunt said, tossing me a set of keys looking like they came straight off a shrimp boat. The window stuck halfway. The AC rattled like it was working out a grudge, but pushed a thread of cool air that felt like grace. I set a shoebox on the crate I called a nightstand. Inside, index cards, a phone adapter for SD cards, 3 red rubber bands, a thumb drive wrapped in a sliver of foil because old habits stick when you've worked with records too long, and a photo of myself at 19, chin up, eyes bigger than my body. The water behind me in that photo looked like a promise I forgot to collect. "Storm money tastes like sugar until you find the ants," Aunt said, passing me a mug of chicory coffee. "You gonna follow them ants?" "I'm gonna follow the paper." She clinked her mug against mine. Paper don't lie unless somebody tells it to. Late, the rain came. On the way home from the church, I sat in my car and watched the fellowship hall office door through a curtain of water. Father-in-law stepped out with a brown envelope under his arm, pastor 2 steps behind, glasses in his hand. "Don't bring the ledger to the committee," father-in-law said low. "Summaries only. No explanations nobody asked for." "The ledger belongs to the church," pastor said. "Everything belongs to the church if I say so," father-in-law said without looking back. I didn't move until the taillights dissolved into rubies and disappeared. Next day, Aunt's lunch window brought half the shipyard and most of the shrimpers' cousins. Men in boots asked for extra hot sauce and left bills crumpled under ketchup bottles. A boy with a backpack hovered near the end of the counter, one hand on a small drone like it was a restless bird he was soothing. "You fly good?" Aunt asked him, because Aunt asked everybody something. "Best in my class," he said. "I shoot roofs for realtors sometimes. My mom sells houses over by the bayou." I felt my heartbeat change its shoes. "You have footage of Pine Street?" "Got footage of everything," he said. "Blue tarps are my brand." I bought him a shrimp po' bob and asked his name. "Jaden," he said, grinning. I bought his SD card, too. I parked by the marsh and slid the card into the phone adapter with the care I usually reserve for babies and bread fresh from the oven. The drone footage unfolded in shaky, pretty lines. Houses like models on a train set, yards like rugs, roofs like scabs. Blue tarp snapped in the wind on 8 parcels I already knew by number. None of them had new shingles, not one. My breath left me slow. I said what I say when the truth shows its first clean face. Count everything. Back at church, I found the ledger in a closet behind old vacation Bible school banners that smelt like paint and every awkward song I'd sung with children who deserved better snacks. The rubber band snaps like dry spaghetti. In the margins and past her small, careful hand, I saw faint notations I'd never noticed before. Vendor questions marked with dots, random dates that made no sense unless you'd been in the room when Kendra presented slides or when the building committee met. It was pastor's guilt recorded in pencil and pressed so lightly it barely marked a page. The notes weren't much, but they were someone else's witness besides mine. While I read, my phone buzzed. "Caleb, you coming home or you moved into Pearls for good?" he asked. "I'm at the church," I said. He huffed. "Father says you're snooping. He says you're turning small into big like you always do when you get a whiff of something you don't like." "We got checks cut to a roofing vendor who hasn't roofed. We got Kendra holding up slides like cards in a trick. You don't understand how the deals are structured," he said. "First payment before, second after inspection." "Inspections that never happen," I said. A door opened at the end of the hall and shut again. I lowered my voice.
Don't tell me to ignore the numbers. My stomach knows when a soup burned. Same with ledgers. He was quiet long enough that I heard the TV in the background, a Joe Show host yelling like joy was a product you could buy in a screaming fit. Naomi, he said finally, don't make this ugly. Father is taking care of it. I don't need him to take care of anything for me. I need roofs. He laughed the way he always laughed when he wanted to end an argument with a shrug. You always did love being right. You ain't any fun when you are. I hung up and slid the ledger into a tote bag. I didn't run. I don't run unless a stove is smoking or a child is falling. Out at the dock, Aunt sat on a milk crate peeling shrimp like she was solving a puzzle, one curl at a time. I told her as much as I could without saying words that would make the room feel smaller than it already was. You bringing paper to a fight where folks only respect people. Paper can work if the right people hold it. I thought Pastor might be one of the right people. I said, Pastor's tired. Tired men lie more, not to hurt you, to make their own hearts take a nap.
Kendra filed an emergency petition the following week. I learned about it from a clerk at the courthouse who still owed me 3 favors and a mason jar. The petition said Aunt Pearl was no longer able to manage her affairs, that her cognitive decline put her business at risk, that a guardian should be appointed to safeguard her legacy. Kendra wrote the words legacy and safeguard like she invented them. She attached a letter from father-in-law that read like scripture if scripture had learned how to flatter itself. I didn't tell Aunt right away. I went straight to legal aid because I had seen too many old folks lose homes to signatures they never read and court dates they could not afford to miss. The reception area buzzed with tired people wearing tired shoes. A woman with hoop earrings and a voice meant to cut through noise called out names like a bailiff. Counselor Whitaker, your noon is early and your coffee is going cold. A man in shirt sleeves with ink on his fingers smiled at me like we knew each other. Naomi, he said, shaking my hand. Andre Whitaker, your aunt fed me half my law school meals. I owe her more than I can repay in filings. He read the guardianship petition, then whistled through his teeth. They filed ex parte. Judge might sign this without seeing Pearl if somebody doesn't make noise. Then we make noise, I said. He smiled again, not like a man enjoying a fight, but like a man grateful to be in the right one. You have documentation? I set the ledger on his desk. He touched the cover with the gentleness of a man holding something that could explode. He flipped to the margins. He read the vendor names. I slid the parcel ID list across. Roof footage, 8 parcels with tarps, 8 checks cut to Gulf Grace Roofing. He looked at me with admiration and an edge of worry. You know what it means to walk into a churchman's office with numbers and questions. People will forgive a thief before they forgive a loud woman. I'm not walking into his office. I'm walking into the county commission. He leaned back. Ambitious. I said, obvious. He filed a motion to stop the guardianship until a hearing. He wrote words into the filing that felt like they might reach into the judge's chest and squeeze. Predatory, undue influence, conflict of interest, self-dealing. We attached Aunt's receipts for flour and shrimp and propane, her neat block letters in a ledger that smelled like fryer oil and lilacs. We attached affidavits from men in boots who could not spell affidavit. We attached my list, my photos, my quiet fury as a footnote that no court would accept, but every court should feel. The next Sunday, father-in-law read a statement from the pulpit about slander spread by malcontents. He did not say my name because saying my name would grant me a shape in his story, and men like him preferred to fight fog. You can slap fog and tell yourself you did something. After church, Caleb followed me to the parking lot. His face flushed. You filed against Kendra. I filed for Aunt. You're going to destroy this family. I'm going to set a table where the people you forgot can eat. He kicked a pebble at the curb. He said, I don't know you anymore. I said, you never tried. The commission clerk added us to the agenda for the following Thursday. She'll get 3 minutes, she warned, chewing gum like it was a job. Use them like an axe. Between then and Thursday, my world shrank to index cards and interviews. I visited each address on my list and recorded what I saw. Stained ceilings, mold blooms like bruises, children sleeping under umbrellas for fun, because if you call something a game, kids will play it to make you feel better. Jaden flew his drone and sent me new footage. His mother, Tasha, who sold houses and advice in equal measure, hugged me at the door and told me to stop skipping meals. The night before the hearing, Pastor knocked on Aunt's back door. Aunt let him in without ceremony. He sat at our little aluminum table and held his glasses in both hands as if they would try to run. He set a small stack of paper on the table. Ledger pages, margins filled with his faint pencil marks. He'd photocopied the sections with the most questions and circled his own circles. He said, "I don't know how to stand up and say what I should say," he whispered, eyes on the formica, "but I know paper." "You'll testify?" I asked. He shook his head once. He said, "Not yet," he said, shame coloring his throat, "but I can give you what you need to talk." Aunt slid him a bowl and a spoon. "You don't need to be brave to eat," she said. "You can learn while you chew." Thursday smelled like coffee and county sweat. The commission chamber was a rectangle of wood and flags and microphones that never seemed to sit at the right height. People filled the metal chairs in lines, some from our church, some from the neighborhood where roofs still wore blue. The room felt like a boil ready to pop. Father-in-law sat near the front in a suit so new you could hear it. Kendra wore pearl studs and the look of a woman who had made peace with her own lies because they matched the color palette of her life. Caleb stood near the door, hands in his pockets, jaw set into a cinder block. When our case was called, Andre nodded to me. He said, "You take the first 2 minutes. I'll take the next 2 minutes. We saved the last minute for a surprise." I stood. My legs worked. That felt like a mercy. I walked to the microphone and adjusted it to my height, which always surprises men who think I ought to be smaller than I am. "My name is Naomi Mayfield," I said, voice steady. "I worked at the county records office for 12 years. I can read parcel numbers in my sleep and lies before coffee." A wave of laughter moved through the room like a friendly breeze. I held up papers. 8 checks drawn by our church to a vendor called Gulf Grace Roofing, 8 parcels with blue tarp still on them as of last week. Funds marked as completed work. I have drone footage if you care to see it. I have parcel IDs, dates, check numbers, and statements from residents. I also have a guardianship petition filed against my Aunt Pearl by a woman who serves on the same church committee that authorized those checks. We don't need smoke here. We need roofs. We don't need guardians for minds that work. We need guardians for money that goes missing. I looked down at father-in-law, who smiled at me the way a man smiles at a dog that has learned a trick he doesn't like. Kendra glanced at the press table because she never missed a camera, even invisible ones. Andre spoke next. He walked like a man who respected a floor and a judge and women who could dismantle math. He laid out statues and terms like stepping stones over a creek we had to cross. Conflict of interest, self-dealing, fiduciary duty. He asked the commission to issue a temporary injunction against any transfer of church-related assets to private entities pending an audit. He asked for a referral to the district attorney. He asked them to recognize the guardianship petition as a blunt instrument aimed at a woman whose only crime was feeding people and minding her own ledger. The commission chair, Miss Finch, hair like steel wool and expression like a grandmother who had seen 6 lifetimes of foolishness, leaned toward her mic. "We have counsel here for the church?" she asked, even though she already knew. A man I'd never seen before stood. "Yes, Madam Chair," he said, wearing a suit that cost a roof. "My clients categorically deny any wrongdoing. The vendor in question has been delayed by supply chain issues. Work is scheduled. Receipts are forthcoming. We question the admissibility of drone footage." "Work is scheduled?" Miss Finch said, eyebrows doing choreography. "Contracted," he said smoothly. 2 summers have passed. This isn't scheduled. It's neglected. He cleared his throat. "And as to the guardianship petition, that is a separate and sensitive matter regarding the welfare of an elderly woman. We will not litigate that here." Aunt Pearl stood. She didn't go to the microphone. She didn't need one. "My mind is my business, and my business is my business. Kendra don't get to borrow either without asking me first." She asked a judge instead. The room hummed, then settled like a boat finding balance. Miss Finch tapped her microphone with a fingernail. "This is a county, and these are roofs." In the second half of the session, a woman from Pine Street spoke. She talked about sleeping with buckets lined like soldiers. A man from Lark Lane talked about his mother's cough.
A teacher talked about children who could not read because the house they lived in did not give them enough dry hours in a day to do homework. By the time the commission voted to refer the matter to the district attorney and freeze any county-related disbursements to Harbor Hands, Kendra's nonprofit with the glossy website, the room felt like the moment after thunder, when your body's sure the noise has ended, but your bones still hum. They also voted to request a forensic audit of the church's storm fund committee by a firm none of us knew, which is how you knew they meant it. They voted to recommend the Chancery Court rescind any emergency guardianship order regarding Aunt Pearl unless an independent assessment determined it was warranted, which any soul with eyes could have told you it wouldn't be. Kendra stormed out before the roll call ended. Caleb left after her, dragging a hand down his face like he was trying to erase it. Father-in-law stood very still, the way men stand when the earth under them is turned from carpet to mud and they aren't wearing shoes fit for it. Outside, the air felt new. Aunt held my hand all the way to the truck. "You did it," she said. "We did it, and we still have to make it stick." "Truth sticks if you give it a clean wall," she said. The DA's office called 2 days later. An investigator named Carla Nguyen asked me to bring everything. We sat in a room with carpet the color of oatmeal and a clock that ticked like a conscience. I laid out my files, pastor's photocopies, the drone footage, the parcel list, receipts that never matched the dates checks were supposedly sent. "Who else knows you have this?" Carla asked. "Everyone who should and a few who shouldn't," I said. She smiled without humor. "We will be moving quietly," she said, "but you should be ready for loud." That afternoon, under a sky as blue as a new bruise, Pastor resigned. He handed in a letter that said God was bigger than his courage and he was sorry about that. He added a paragraph about the ledger and accountability and Jesus turning tables when men used religion to launder money. The paper printed it. People argued on porches and in lines and in comment sections that burned the eyes. Caleb moved his tools out of our house a week later. He took the socket set and forgot his favorite mug. I left it on the counter for 2 days before I washed it and put it in the back of the cabinet with other things that might be useful someday to somebody else. He didn't call. He sent a text that said, "You ruined us." I didn't answer because I didn't ruin anything. I just refused to carry the rot for 1 more mile. When the audit report came, it was thicker than any Bible I ever owned. It said a lot of words that added up to the simple truth we'd already put on the screen. Money left a pot meant for roofs and fell into pockets or projects that looked like roofs if you squinted through fog made of fellowship and barbecues and public prayers. Father-in-law's signature walked through the report like a guilty man late for church. Kendra's nonprofit board issued a statement about bookkeeping errors and rapid growth beyond our capacity and deep regret. She took down photos from her website that showed children under tarps and replaced them with photos of clean hands. Carla called to say indictments were being drafted. She said, "Don't celebrate yet. There's always a last kick."
The last kick came as a letter in a fake friendly envelope. It was addressed to me. I opened it in Aunt's kitchen, hands dry, mouth drier. The letter said a defamation suit had been filed against me by the church, naming me as a disgruntled volunteer with a vendetta. It asked for damages I could not pay in 5 lifetimes. It attached screenshots of my Facebook comments from years ago about storm funds and rabid dogs, a metaphor I'd used that sounded stupid now, and dragged me through sentences I didn't even remember writing late at night when anger buzzed like a bug that wouldn't die. "It's paper," Aunt said, touching my wrist. "Mean paper, but paper." Andre filed an anti-slap motion, the kind of motion meant to swap lawsuits that exist only to shut people up. He said, "They won't win this. They want to scare you. Scaring is free. Courage is work." I worked. I made index card after index card and labeled them like you label jars, bank statements, check copies, vendor invoices, parcel photos, drone stills. I put rubber bands around stacks and stacked the stacks until my stacks had little shadows in the afternoon. I tried not to think about Caleb, which means I thought about him every night at the same hour the way you think about a tooth you had pulled. The ghost of it, the ache that wasn't exactly pain but wasn't not. A month after the hearing, the commission met again. The room was packed tighter than a shrimp net. Miss Finch called us forward. "We have assets acquired by shell bidders connected to church officers," she said. "Vacant lots acquired after storm foreclosures with money that cannot be cleanly traced." She adjusted her glasses. "We have tools."
They proposed to seize those lots under a statute I'd never heard of, one that let the county claim property used in a scheme to defraud public programs. The vote would be close. The room feels close even when the vote doesn't. While speakers lined up, a man in a suit I didn't know asked to be heard. He represented a consortium of faith partners who wanted to acquire the lots to redeem them for ministry. The room murmured. I looked at Aunt. She looked at me. We didn't need a whispered plan. We had a life full of them. I walked to the microphone. If the county takes these lots, I said, don't sell them back into the same hands. I pointed behind me, not at any one person, but at the shape of a system we all understood. Our kitchen's been small for a long time. Give us one big enough to feed us right. Build a training yard where boys who fly drones and girls who fix engines can apprentice without asking permission. Put the lots together like we put our strength together and call it something we can live with. Somebody in the back yelled, call it Naomi's, because people enjoy teasing a woman who doesn't blush on command. Call it the Back Bay Kitchen and Yard. It ain't mine. It's ours. Miss Finch chewed that with her eyes half closed. She said, we will put it to a vote. The roll call felt like waiting on a hurricane path update. When it came down to a tie, the last commissioner paused long enough to make drama and then said yes like the letter had been stuck to his palate. Outside, under a sun that felt like a sentence and a blessing both, Aunt cried in a way I'd only seen her cry at funerals and births. Deep, grateful, scared that the good thing will disappear if you look at it too hard. We broke ground on a Tuesday with borrowed shovels and a backhoe that sputtered like a man trying to apologize. Volunteers from the shipyard and the church and the school showed up. Kendra didn't. Father-in-law didn't. Caleb drove by twice and didn't get out of the truck. Jaden filmed the whole thing with his drone, then posted a video that made us look like we knew what we were doing.
Carla called to say indictments had been handed down. She said Kendra and father-in-law and two men whose names I had learned only because I had to were charged with fraud, misuse of funds, conspiracy. She asked me to come down and sign a witness statement as clean as I could make it. I signed my name on more lines than I thought a life should require. I said what I knew and declined to guess at what I didn't. I did not celebrate because celebrations are for endings, and this was another beginning that would require soap and lists and patience. Caleb knocked on Aunt's door one night with eyes that looked older than his face. You could have told me, he said. I tried, I said. You could have told me by sitting me down and talking like we were on the same side. I sat you down, I said. You were standing up on the inside. He looked at his hands. Dad's been my job since I was 12, he said, keeping him from lighting fires and babysitting his ashes as if they were gold. You don't have to be his firefighter anymore, I said. I don't know who I am if I'm not, he said. You can learn, I said. People have learned bigger things for less. He stood in my aunt's kitchen and took the kind of breath a man takes before he chooses, sometimes for the first time in his life, for himself. I'm going to talk, he said finally. To the DA, I'm not your confessor, but I'm glad. Aunt slid him a plate like it proved something, that he was still a person in a kitchen where people ate. He ate and cried into his napkin like a boy in the bathroom at prom. Weeks folded into each other. We hung sheetrock in the kitchen. We marked out a yard for apprenticeships in carpentry and electrical and kitchen skills. We found a retired inspector willing to teach code to kids with hands that already knew what wood wanted to be. We wrote a simple mission statement on the wall with a Sharpie, because sometimes you have to see your promise in black lines to believe you can keep it. Count everything. Feed everyone. Teach what you know. The day the Back Bay Kitchen opened, it rained like a blessing. People showed up anyway. We set tables with plastic tablecloths and real napkins, because dignity lives in that kind of detail. Miss Finch came. Carla came. Pastor came without his collar, looking like a man who had put down a heavy box but didn't yet know where to put his hands. He asked if he could say grace. Aunt said yes, because refusing wouldn't have made his apology any more true or less necessary. He prayed simple. He asked forgiveness without naming any person, which is sometimes a strength and sometimes a sin. He said amen like he meant it. Our amen sounded like thunder from the inside. Father-in-law didn't come to the opening. He sent a letter to the paper the next week about persecution and slippery slopes and sinners judging saints.
I didn't read all of it because I've learned how to save my eyes. At the kitchen, we ran on schedules and stubbornness. Jaden managed the media page and posted photos that made our food look loaves and fishes important. Tasha ran front of house like she had been born with a seating chart in her palm. Kids who had stopped believing adults could teach them anything learned how to wire a light switch and how to hold a knife without bleeding. Kendra took a plea. Father-in-law demanded a trial. Then when he saw the witness list, changed his mind at the last minute. He took a deal too. He stood before a judge with a jaw that chewed on air and accepted words into his life like guilty and restitution. The judge didn't send him to prison. He sent him to community service and payment plans and the kind of public apology that tastes like dust. People complained that it wasn't enough. I didn't argue. I was too tired to measure other people's justice. I had our own to do. Caleb showed up some afternoons with a tool belt and a face that looked like it needed permission to be forgiven. I didn't grant it. I didn't deny it. I let him work. Forgiveness is a stool you have to build yourself. People can hand you the lumber and hold the screws, but they can't sit on it for you. He built his slowly, with splinters and muttered curses and a kind of tenderness that came around like a stray cat, suspicious and hungry, deciding if our porch could be a home. One evening, as the sun slid behind the freight cranes and turned their silhouettes into hieroglyphs, I found a box by the back door. Inside were old ledgers and newer notebooks and a letter in Pastor's small, careful hand. He had gathered the records from the church committee and donated them to our kitchen's small office so that anyone who wanted to learn how to read money would have a place to practice. His letter said, "I cannot undo. I can witness forward." I cried into my dish towel because the phrase was exactly right. People asked if we'd name a dish after Kendra or father-in-law or me. No monuments, I said. Monuments feed nobody. We did name the apprentice yard after Aunt because Aunt would outlive her own name by sheer refusal. She wore the plaque like a joke. Look, they finally made me official. The kitchen kept feeding. The yard kept teaching. Once a man I didn't know stood too close to the counter and asked, soft as a threat, "You done now?" I wiped my hands on my apron and said, "Sir, we are never done." He nodded and backed away like a man who had come to test a fence and learned it was electrified. I wrote some nights after the last pot was bleached and the last stool turned upside down on the table. I wrote not for a book, but for breath. I wrote down every line that felt like it belonged to a larger story than mine. I wrote, "Your name will be used by people who don't want you to use your own mouth. Use it anyway." I wrote, "Count everything, cans, checks, breaths, griefs, because if you don't count it, somebody will steal it and call it theirs." I wrote, "Mercy without math is just noise." One winter evening, a young woman with a baby in a sling came in and ordered 2 plates. She paid with crumpled ones and the kind of apology we've trained poor people to carry in their hands like a badge. "No, sorry," I said, pushing a plate back to her without taking $1. She cried, and I cried, and Aunt rolled her eyes because she believes in feeding first and crying later when your body is too tired to make a mess about it. On a Tuesday that felt like a Sunday, quiet, reflective, soft edges, Caleb walked to the dock with a box. He set it on Aunt's counter. "That's trophies," he said. "I don't want the dust. I don't want the stories. Stories come back even when you burn the trophies," Aunt said. He nodded. "I'm learning." He looked at me like a man trying to ask a question without words. I nodded, which in our language meant, "Keep showing up. We'll see." We work best in verbs. At the 1-year mark, Miss Finch came to the kitchen without a camera and sat on a stool like any mortal. She ate red beans and rice and put $5 in the tip jar and told me a joke that wasn't funny but made sense. She asked if we had any requests. I handed her a list without ceremony because ceremony is for other rooms. It said, dry storage space, walk-in cooler, apprentice stipends. She laughed and said, "You do not dream small." I said, "Small dreams attract thieves. They think they can pick them up and pocket them." 2 months later, a walk-in cooler arrived, donated by a man who had made more money than good sense and decided to correct the ratio. We named the cooler Mercy and the freezer Math, and we wrote little signs on their doors so the teenagers would remember to shut them tight.
Sometimes at night, I walked the lot and counted the steps from the kitchen to the apprentice sheds to the tool library we built out of a container that used to carry televisions across the world. I counted steps because counting brings my mind back to my body when fear tries to unspool me. I counted and told the air the facts. We have a lease. We have a line item in the county budget because Miss Finch is craftier than her hair tells you. We have a waiting list for apprentices. We have receipts. We have recipes. We have people who call us before they fall because they know we pick up. Pastor came by one night and stood by the herb garden, pretending to examine basil like a man who wanted to talk but needed a pretext. I turned a blind eye, he said out of nowhere. It's a phrase people use as a passive. I didn't. I took my working eye and shut it. You opened it, I said. Too late. You opened what you had. He shrugged and touched the basil again. Smells like something you should put in a soup and call it healing. Herbs help if you start early, I said. Tell me what to do next, he said. And some might hear that as weakness, but I hear it as a sentence filled with the best kind of surrender. Teach people how to read church budgets. Offer a free class. Use our office if you need a room. I'll stutter through the first 3, he said. People only remember you stuttered and kept talking, I said. He started the class. He stuttered. He kept talking. A boy who used to steal time on our tolls because he didn't believe he deserved to borrow them became our best apprentice electrician. He wired his mother's trailer the week after a storm and stopped 3 fires before they had the chance to name themselves. A girl who loved knives for the wrong reasons learned how to use one to cut onions and then to turn out a brunoise so fine it made an old chef at the shipyard cry. A woman whose husband called her stupid found out she was good at inventory and now runs our ordering better than anybody used to run anything at our church. Kendra disappeared from town the same way she once arrived everywhere, lightly, expensively. I heard she moved to Atlanta. I heard she started selling a skincare line with bottles so pretty you forget the contents. I heard. I never needed to know. Father-in-law moved slower. He became the kind of old man who sits in a fold-out chair on his porch and complains to anyone who will listen, and even to people who won't. He tried to come to the kitchen once the fuss died down. He walked up to the line. Aunt looked him up and down, handed him a plate, and charged him full price. He tried to hand back a folded bill with the corners worn, and she waited until he opened it, because Aunt doesn't take anything she can't count. It was a 5. He owed more. He put down 3 more ones and left without looking at his change. Progress, I guess. People asked me to write a book. So I took the notebooks I kept and I threaded them with the days I hadn't written down because my hands were too busy holding something heavy that might drop otherwise. I wrote simple because the story was not complicated. People did what they always do when a pot of money gets warm. Their hands got close. People did what they always do when a woman counted out loud. They called her angry and told her she was ruining the meal with all that talking. I talked anyway. The book sold enough to buy us a set of ovens that bake bread evenly and a set of expectations that bake people evenly too. At the kitchen, on the wall by the mop closet, we painted words in block letters so straight even Aunt's kindest eye couldn't call them crooked. Count everything. Feed everyone. Teach what you know. Tell the truth before it gets tired. On the 2nd anniversary, Miss Finch cut a ribbon no camera watched. Carla came and ate 2 bowls of gumbo because she said she had to make up for all the meals she missed while working late. Pastor sang, soft and on key. Caleb brought a toolbox to donate and didn't make a speech. Aunt rolled a cart of biscuits through the room and called out names like she was telling fortunes. I stood outside, under a sky finally learning how to be gentle, and said thank you to the air, to the ledger with its rubbed white corners and broken rubber band, to the boy who flew drones, and to the woman who stamped papers, and to the county that sometimes gets it right. I said thank you to the girl I was at 19 who believed water was a promise, and to the woman I became who learned that promises needed paper and people and a spoon and a sharp pencil. I say it now in case somebody needs to hear it from a woman who knows. You can love your people and still say they're wrong. You can belong to a church and still count its money out loud. You can choose a ledger over a lie. You can leave a house and build a kitchen. You can be called loud and be called less and keep showing up until the room rearranges itself around the truth you brought in your hands. One day a girl in braids asked me if Mercy and Math could get married. I said they did a long time ago and people kept trying to divorce them, but we in the business of remarriage. We measure flour, we measure checks. We measure the distance between what we say on Sunday and what we do on Monday.
The gap gets smaller if somebody stands in it. I stood. Others joined. Now when I walk the lot at dusk and the basil throws its smell into the fat air and the freezer called math hums like contentment, I count without fear. I count because it honors the living and embarrasses the thieves and feeds the hungry and teaches the children and keeps the promises you made when you still believe promises could keep themselves. People ask when we done. We answer with the menu. Tomorrow, chicken and sausage jambalaya, green beans, cornbread, apprenticeship and electrical at 9, safety talk at noon, budget class with pastor at 6, everybody welcome. Index cards in the back if you need to write down what you're owed. There's a jar on the counter if you want to leave what you can. There's a door at the side that sticks sometimes. Push with your shoulder, it will open. And if you got a ledger at home with a rubber band barely holding, bring it. We'll sit in the office with the fan that clacks like a loose tooth and we'll go line by line. We won't call you dumb. We won't call you crazy. We'll call you by your name and hand you a pencil and show you where the numbers hide and how to make them speak. We'll walk you to the microphone when it's time, and we'll stand behind you when your voice shakes. And if someone calls you free labor with a loud mouth, you will smile like a porch light and tell them counting is counting, soup or ledger. On nights when the wind remembers storms, when tarps flash in my dreams like old flags, I get up and boil water just to hear something I control. I make tea and I sit on the back step and I watch the lot breathe. The shadows, the stray cats, the herbs, the stacks of pallets that will become something useful tomorrow. Aunt's bedroom light glows soft through the curtain. I hold the old ledger close sometimes, ridiculous as it sounds, like a woman might hold a child that is no longer a child. I don't love the book. I love what it helped me do. It's not much, a ledger, paper and lines, names and numbers. But the first time you see a margin note in someone else's tiny hand and realize they were trying to say something from inside a system that taught them to whisper, well, you learn to listen harder. You learn to make space for quiet people and squeaky fans and kids who enter rooms sideways, ready to run. If you had told me 2 years ago that a county hearing would feel like a baptism, I would have laughed. But that day, when the drone fed the truth to a room that couldn't look away, I felt the cool rush of a new life. Not new like naive, new like cleaned, like something that had been scrubbed with a brush until the stain surrendered. At the edge of the lot, there's a sign. It's wood, not fancy. The paint peels in a charming way that won't last 2 summers. Jaden stenciled it, and Aunt added a flourish with a Sharpie because Aunt believes in embellishments where they don't cost anything. The sign says, Back Bay Kitchen and Yard. Under that we wrote in smaller letters, Count everything, feed everyone, teach what you know. A woman came by last week with a ledger of her own, green plastic cover, spiral bent. She said, It's just my little daycare. I don't think there's anything special to see. I said, Bring she into the office. We sat with the fan clacking and the clock that ticked like a conscience. We went line by line. We found where her partner had been skimming. 10 here, 20 there, a sin of small scoops that adds up faster than hunger. She started to cry. I slid the box of tissues and a glass of water across the desk. You can fix this, I said. We'll walk you to the microphone if the time comes. She looked at me like a student looks at a teacher on the day she realizes she might be one herself. She said, Thank you, Mama. I don't mind when kids call me that. I mind when men do. Names mean everything and nothing depending on who's speaking. Around here, I'll answer to Naomi or Miss Naomi or ma'am if a child is practicing respect. I'll answer to, Hey, kitchen, if the voice carries a request for seconds. I'll answer to troublemaker with a smile because a woman who counts is always trouble until the hungry eat. When I think of father-in-law now, I don't think of his deacon pin or his type of suit or his smile like a blade. I think of a boy he might have been, taught that power is a version of love and that money is an instrument you play loudly so no one notices you don't know the melody. I pray for him the way I pray for rusted bolts and spoiled milk. Honest, practical prayers that ask for what can actually happen. Loosen. Sour fast or so we know. Be revealed. Caleb sits sometimes at the edge of the apprentice yard, chewing on a toothpick like his father, but softer. He watches the kids measure twice and cut once, and he sometimes whispers the same, as if saying it might teach him something he missed. He stays for cleanup most nights now. He learned the mop-water ratio by heart, and that is a kind of repentance I recognize. If you come by, I'll put a plate in your hands. I'll show you the office where we keep our own ledger. It's not marbled. It's cheap and organized and smells like coffee. We keep our receipts, our invoices, our habit of flipping to the back and writing notes to ourselves.
Check the freezer seal. Pay the pecan farmer because he trusted us. Order lids. Don't forget to call Miss Hattie about her nephew's apprenticeship interview. We keep a page titled Promises Kept because it helps when the sink clogs and the grease trap forgets its manners. And when you leave, I'll walk you to the door that sticks. I'll put my shoulder into it and you'll laugh and I'll say, everything worth anything takes a little push. Then I'll go back to the stove or the stapler or the stool where a girl sits with a knife and a board trying to learn how to make carrots into cubes. I'll tell her a story about a time a woman was told she was free labor with a loud mouth and how she smiled like a porch light and went back into the office and opened a ledger and broke a rubber band and decided to live by numbers and soup, mercy and math forever. If she asks me what to do when a man with a suit and a soft hand tells her to be quiet, I'll tell her what I tell everybody. Count out loud.